Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Garden Girls podcast. If you're new here, our names are Dagny, Meg, and Amy. And today we're going to be getting into the nitty gritty of being a garden content creator on social media and kind of just telling you a little bit about our origin stories, which I always think is so fun because they're never what you think they're going to be. So I'm really excited to hear our stories and kind of more behind the scenes of what Meg and Amy are doing. So, Meg, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I have a pretty interesting origin story. It's kind of long. I'll try to shorten it, but my social media presence actually began with a houseplant page. I didn't really start the page because I wanted to become something on social media. It was more just because I had this really niche hobby and no one else around me had that hobby and I wanted to connect to people. So my house plants were mainly aeroids. That's what I love to grow. So philodendrons, anthuriums, things like that. My handle was actually once upon a philodendron. So if you followed me when I was that, shout out to you. You're an OG. But yeah, it just began as me sharing photos because this was back when Instagram was just photos. I think it was like 2019. It was just me sharing photos of my cool plants that I thought were cool. And I kept it a secret from all of my friends and family at first. It was just such a like unique hobby and no one really understood it. And when I say it's a hobby, I mean I had like hundreds of houseplants. We were in a tiny little apartment. When you would walk into our apartment, there were just plants everywhere. Like family and friends would come over and they would just be like, "Wow, so you really like plants?" And I would just be like, yeah, I do. But I really found connection with people and I found a lot of friends that also are really into houseplants. So I love that. But then my social media kind of started to change when we moved into our house and I had a backyard to play around with. And I'd always wanted to garden. And so I started my very first garden beds. And then that's when I decided to start TikTok. And I had never been on TikTok before, but I kind of just wanted to document my garden's process, kind of like how I was doing with my houseplants. I didn't tell anybody about it. It was just for fun because, again, no one around me was a gardener. None of my friends or family garden. So it was just a way for me to find other like minded people that I could just share with and connect with. So if you scroll back far enough on my TikTok, you'll see my very first video and it was me installing my very first garden bed ever. As I kept building the garden, I just kept making these silly videos and it just kind of spiraled. People really started liking my garden. Once I could harvest things, I started making videos of me harvesting. And again, it was more just like documentation at that time. I wasn't trying to be a content creator, anything like that. But then once the traction kind of started, I was like, okay, maybe this could be something. And I was like, just really surprised that so many people all around the world liked my tiny little garden so much. It was really surreal. And that's kind of where we're at today. I ended up changing my handle to Meg Grows Plants instead of Once Upon a Philodendron because that was super niche to like the houseplant thing. And at first, I wanted my social media to kind of be houseplants and gardening together, but it turns out social media doesn't like that. It wants you to really niche down. And I've found it becoming really difficult to take care of hundreds of houseplants inside and hundreds of plants outside. So now I still have houseplants, but it's very few. And I don't really make content about them anymore. I kind of fully transitioned into the gardening space.
Do you ever miss talking about the houseplants?
I do. I love houseplants. I love aeroids. And the reason I even built my greenhouse was going to be for my aeroids. I was really into the rare plant game, like the Monstera Thai constellations, Monstera albo, all of the anthurium. I just really loved rare plants and like the velvety plants. I still love them so much. Another part of it was in our apartment, we had so much light. It was great light. It was houseplant heaven. When we moved into this house, I don't have the best light in this house, so I find it harder to keep houseplants here anyway, but I really do miss them. And I think if we ever move, I will definitely pick up the houseplant hobby again. But I still very much have an interest and a passion for houseplants, specifically aeroids.
This is so interesting to me because, I mean, if you're not in social media, you might not know this, but it's really hard to change niches or categories of what you're talking about. And the fact that you were able to do that and keep the same account, because I was going to ask you if you ended up with a brand new handle or if you had changed your username entirely and just kept the same account. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think when I changed my username, I had 18,000 followers on like my houseplant page where I was just talking about houseplants before I kind of fully transitioned. And I had thought about making a brand new page, but I would ask my audience, if I start posting more gardening content, would you still follow me? And everybody was kind of encouraging me to just not start a new page. They were like, we'll follow you either way. You know, if you're a plant lover, I feel like even if you're mostly into houseplants, you'll still enjoy seeing gardening content. So I decided to keep it as is. And my Instagram was in a lull for quite a long time. It was almost like the, quote unquote algorithm or whatever, what it was noticing that I wasn't posting houseplant content anymore. And I thought I was, shadow banned and all of this, but I think it was just transitioning to houseplant stuff. And then once it did that, that's when it kind of started to take back off. Because at this time, my TikTok was only gardening. I didn't post any houseplant stuff on my TikTok. So, my TikTok was kind of gaining traction while my Instagram was in this lull, but then Instagram kind of like caught up to it. So, yeah, that's my whole story of how I got started posting online. Amy, I want to hear about how you started.
I started like a year and a half ago now. I again never really planned on like doing anything with it. Basically, I was just spending all of my evenings like scrolling through TikTok, and it felt so unproductive, and you know how it just kind of like draws you in and you're like, okay, I'm really wasting my time now. So I was like, I'll just make some videos. It feels like a little bit more productive. I don't know why. But yeah, I was just like, I'll just make a couple of videos, and I didn't really want anyone to see them. I don't really know why I uploaded them, to be honest, because I was just embarrassed when people watched them. But then I started to get really nice feedback from people being like, oh, you've really inspired me to start growing vegetables on my balcony, or like just try growing something. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And as someone who found that gardening really helps their mental health, I was like, okay, if I'm inspiring people to start, I could be literally helping people's mental health by doing this indirectly. So I thought that was really cool. So I just kept going, and then it just kept growing and growing from there. And I became slightly less embarrassed the more I did it. And I actually just started on TikTok as well, because I was like, no one will see them there. Like, none of my friends follow me there. No one will know. And then eventually I was like, okay, maybe I should actually post it on Instagram now. The first time I hit post on a video where I was like doing a voiceover, I was like, I just got so nervous. But who cares? Like, honestly, once you've done it, it's done. It's not so scary. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. And I don't think I was even really following any gardening accounts. And since I started, I was like, oh wow, there's actually so many of us, and it's really cool to like connect with everyone. So yeah, that's kind of how I started.
I can totally relate to that cringe feeling when
Mm-hmm.
you first started posting, because it's like very uncomfy. There's something about it, especially because I started mine on Instagram. I didn't get onto TikTok until way later, but my Instagram was my personal Instagram, and it was all of a sudden, what is she doing? What? And I was also really late to Reels as well. So like mostly it had just been like pictures of tomatoes or whatever and a flower, and then all of a sudden it was like, here's my face. Like there's something very like nerve wracking about it at first. And like, I think like a huge part of being a content creator is being able to just go get past that and ignore that. And like, it's not easy. A lot of people will say to me, oh, I could never do what you do. I'm not comfortable in front of the camera. And I'm like, I was not comfortable in front of the camera either.
I was not comfortable. Like, I am a shy person, so being in front of the camera, horrible. Like, even just voiceovers, I found so cringy, and I was like, oh, I hate listening to my own voice. But once you start doing it, you just start to get over it. It's fine.
Especially as you build community and you feel like you're talking to almost like a specific person, even when there's so many of us, we all have so much in common. So you're talking to your friends, even if there's thousands of them now, right? And it's kind of hard to quantify it too. We have fairly large followings. I go into a stadium for a concert or something, I'm like, I have more people following me on Instagram than are in this stadium. That's very weird.
I think a lot of it is just getting past that don't perceive me kind of like attitude, because I definitely had that at first. So it was like when people started finding out about my social media, I was like, yeah, they'd be like, "Oh, I saw you on Instagram." I'm like, "Yeah, thanks. Don't look at it. Don't perceive me. Like, it's fine." But you just have to get past that and then I guess gain a kind of confidence. And I think like, yeah, one of my insecurities was my voice. Like, I grew up hating my voice. And when we were doing like you were saying with the voiceovers, the first time I like cringed, but then I would get all these comments like, oh my gosh, I love your voice. I love listening to you talk. And I'm like, what? I think it's just these insecurities that we internalize, but it's not really real. And you just have to get past that and just make the content, put it out there.
It is such a mental game because we are our own worst critics all of the time. So to get past that and just be like, no, this someone else will like this, like you just have to do it. Yeah, I was only on Instagram for a long time, which I always kick myself for. Like I should have gotten on TikTok sooner. But I started pretty much posting like content creation stuff on there in 2020 as well because I was gardening a lot more and I don't know, I liked taking pictures. I was a photographer already. I did wedding and portrait photography. And so since I wasn't able to do that in 2020, I just started taking pictures of plants instead and putting them online. And it didn't really get a whole lot of traction at first because I wasn't doing video. I really resisted video for a very long time, to be honest. I think because of my photography background, because of how shy I was, it just didn't come naturally to me at all. I remember the first reel that I filmed, I don't know, I was like walking through crunchy leaves in fall and picking them up and putting them in a basket. And like looking back, I'm like, what value did that provide? I don't know. Like it just kind of, everybody starts somewhere, but it did kind of snowball over time. And just as I started to open up more and kind of try more intentionally to build community and talk about the things that I was going through, because the garden was really like a sanctuary space for me in a time where everything was very tumultuous. So I was sharing that in the hopes that it would resonate with someone else. And thankfully it did. As soon as I started kind of doing more video content and sharing like how to's, ended up like having some videos do really, really well. And at that point, I was just like, I don't know, maybe I can make something of this. I was questioning whether I really wanted to go back into wedding photography because of how hard it was on my body, especially as my arthritis had gotten worse over that year. And I kind of just was like, maybe this is a sign, like maybe I should try something new. It was a huge pivot and it was very scary because my business had just started to gain momentum. And I was basically letting a go of all of that momentum to try something entirely new that I wasn't even sure worked. At that point, yes, there were content creators, there are influencers making a living at this, but I was very skeptical that this was something that your average person could do. As much as I had seen of social media, it was just like very wealthy people kind of showing off their lifestyles. I hadn't really seen just like a lot of the content we get to see now where it's more like authentic and just regular people living their lives. So that was a big part of it as well. It was kind of like the wild, wild west. It's a very new industry, and people will ask me all the time, well, how do I get into this? And I truly don't know. I don't have the answer. A lot of it came down to luck. If I had not had certain videos that took off and did very well, if I had not had, a financial cushion and support to kind of take that risk, I don't know that I would have been able to do what I'm doing today.
And like the only way you can do it is to just start. I started while I was working a full-time job, and I actually only just stopped working full-time a couple of months ago and have since just been cutting down my days of work, and it gets exhausting and time consuming.
Yeah, the risk and the reward ratio, it's there. Like we need to just, I don't know. You can't be very risk adverse to do something like this.
Yeah, for sure. It is a total risk. I had a full-time job up until last July, and I remember weighing with my fiance. I was like, I feel like this could be something, but I don't really want to make the jump yet because it's just really risky for you to leave a job and pursue this thing that can be very up and down and like volatile. But I am glad that I did eventually make the jump. But yeah, it's scary.
It is. But tell us some of the positives, Meg.
Yeah, we gotta talk about the positives before
We
we get
do.
into some of the nitty-gritty. I think that there's so many positives. I think community is the biggest thing that has been so good for me and my mental health as well. Just finding like-minded people who are passionate about the things that you're passionate about and being able to share with them. There's something really healing about that I think a lot of people don't talk about, like how healing it can be to just find a community that you fit into. Because, like I said, my friends or family, they didn't like plants or gardening or anything. And I just felt alone and I had no one to share my things with. But now there's hundreds of thousands of people that I have that I can talk to about this. And it's just really healing. And I love that. Also, just like having a creative outlet. I've always been a creative person. When I was younger, I loved making videos. Like I would like almost force my friends to make videos with me, just silly like music videos or just like all kinds of like silly stuff that I would edit on Windows Movie Maker at the time. And I never in a million years thought that I could somehow make a career out of like my silly little hobby for making videos and then my passion for plants. I just never thought that there would be a world where they could merge and that could be like my life. And I love that. I genuinely love this job. And so I think it's like a huge creative outlet. And I love when I get to create something and put it out there and people like it and they respond to it and they relate to it. There's just like a feeling that's almost kind of addicting. And you're just like, wow, this is really, really cool. And then I think just learning from the community. I have learned so much about gardening from the community. And like I said, when I started my first TikTok video with me putting in a garden bed. And I think I asked people, like my very first video was me putting in that bed and I was asking people what I should plant. So my very first video was me asking and then me learning from people commenting on that video. And I think that's really cool because I didn't just start this knowing everything. Like I started from the very beginning and I think my audience has helped me gain the knowledge to be able to do this, if that makes sense. And I think it's just a really cool full circle moment. And that just makes me feel even more connected. Like I said, I think that's the best thing about it is just the connection.
I completely agree. That community of people, I think it's so difficult to find community connection in life generally these days. And to have that group of people who are all interested in the same thing as you, it's just crazy to just find that group of people who are so aligned with you. And like when you make videos, it's like, I'm just making this video for all of my friends. Like I find this really interesting, so I know that they'll find it interesting too because we're interested in the same things. So I just think that's so cool. And yeah, just being able to be creative. And also weirdly, Meg, I think I made videos, like music videos with my friends when I was younger as well.
Did you?
I wish I still had them somewhere.
That's awesome.
Maybe one of my friends does.
I have mine somewhere in a very secret place because no one can ever see those again, but I will watch them. They're on like CDs. I don't even know how to use a CD anymore, to be honest.
But yeah, I think also we are very lucky that our job is literally to do the things that we enjoy and film them. It's amazing. I love trying new things and experimenting with things and being like, well, that was my day today. It's pretty insane to me. I'm still not used to it. It's still kind of new to me. So every day I'm like, what am I doing today? Oh, this is weird. And being my own boss as well is kind of strange. But yeah, there's so many positives and I'm still not used to it yet.
I think that's probably the coolest part is like the other day when that monarch butterfly was eclosing, I got to just drop everything and film that instead. I had filming to do, but that was clearly more important. And the fact that that was like part of my job was like so cool. It never gets old. But other than that, I mean, as far as the community aspect of it goes, of course I can relate to that. But more specifically for me, because of the chronic pain that I was experiencing, I was in a really dark place when I started posting a lot more. Like I was going through it. I felt like I was losing vital parts of my identity because my body wasn't letting me garden in a lot of cases. I could not do what I wanted to do. And I found that like sharing that and being really real with people about what I was going through online was so healing because I was not at all alone. Not only were other people experiencing the same exact condition that I had, but they were also experiencing the same or similar limitations from other situations that arose in their life. And that has just been the biggest piece of it for me. It's almost not even about the plants anymore. It's about the accessibility and helping people feel empowered to grow food or garden in whatever way makes sense for them, because there's just so many limiting beliefs around it. And my goal has become and evolved into being like, how can I eliminate those limiting beliefs for people?
Well said.
Thank you. But of course, like the creative outlet part of it is enormous for me as well. And I have people in my life who knew me when I was a photographer be like, do you even take pictures anymore? And it's funny because I really don't, but I still feel incredibly creatively fulfilled. Like I'll pull stills from my video of like the butterfly or whatever, and that's good enough for me. But it's interesting like how much my creativity has changed, but I'm still able to honor that just in a totally different way now. And then coming back to what you said, Meg, about having this huge resource at our fingertips, I think oftentimes people think I'm some kind of gardening expert. I am not. I do not know what I'm doing half the time, but it's really cool to have like an entire unit of people that I can just post a story and be like, hey, what is going on with this tomato plant? And I'll get responses and we all learn together.
At the end of the day, we're all just learning from each other. The only thing that kind of separates us was like we're just putting out content about it. It's like, hey, I found this monarch in my garden and here's how she got here, or hey, I grew this tomato, here's how I did it. Hey, I grew this plant, here's how I did it. We're just kind of like putting out the information that we learn from our audience and also other people in the gardening community. Like I've learned from you guys, before we even started our group chat, like I was following and learning from you guys.
We're just sharing things from our perspective, and similar to what Dagny said in terms of physical accessibility, I'm super interested in making the information accessible to complete beginners as well. That's the amazing thing about the internet. All different people can appeal to different audiences, and I feel like some gardening information can be quite confusing, especially if you're just starting and there's so much information out there. So having all different people to learn from, you can just pick and choose whoever you learn best from or whoever you just enjoy watching the most.
We've all been online for quite a long time now and we've grown and we've learned a lot. So yeah, like you were saying, now I feel better now about teaching gardening to beginners than I did when I first started my social media page, for sure. I feel much more informed and able to like actually teach now, which is another aspect, which is really cool. Like you're teaching newbies that used to be in the position that you were in when you were first starting out. Again, like a cycle, a circle.
Those are my favorite messages, the people that are like, you inspired me to plant something.
I love getting like the kind messages like, I grew carrots this year because of you, because of your chaos carrot method. And I'm like, all I did was throw carrots on the ground and film it. Honestly, I didn't really do anything, but it's just cool to see that you inspired someone to try something different and it worked for them.
Yeah.
And then they tell you about it.
Yeah, and like recipes as well. When people make the food or drinks that I make and they send me a picture of it and they're like, oh my God, this was so good. Or like, my daughter ate loads of these or whatever. It's so cute. And also, when I ask people for their recipe suggestions, that is just the best resource ever. I love that.
Their recipes are the best.
Yeah.
Like when someone makes your food, because food is like a love language for me. I love making people food. And when someone, again, it's the same with recipes. Like if I share a recipe and someone makes it and they're like, I made this and it was so good, it like warms my heart.
Okay, but I need to know the secrets. Tell me what you're not showing us about your garden, because I know there's something.
So some things I don't share. I try to not share the front of my house because I don't want to just show people where I live. So even though I do some gardening in the front of my house, I don't really share that. Or if I do, it's like really close up little bits and pieces, but I'm not, here's how I did, my front house garden or whatever, because I do live in the city and I don't live in the best area. So if I lived more rural, I don't think I would care. But just because I live in the city, I try not to show anyone the front of my house. I try to film everything in the back garden because everything is content, right? But sometimes I do try to just take moments to myself. outside because it can also be kind of draining, just feeling like you have to film every little thing that goes on. And sometimes I like to just be vibing out in my garden without filming or thinking what I need to film, and like just be out there with no camera, no outline, no purpose, but just to enjoy it. And then one thing I don't share because it's super embarrassing is the state of my greenhouse right now because I tend to use my greenhouse as like a catch-all kind of shed during the summer because I don't use it in the summer. It's too hot. Like it's just nothing grows in there. It just will crisp. I usually use it in the spring and the fall to start seedlings or overwinter things. But the state of my greenhouse right now is just crazy because there's chicken feed, there's everything for the chickens is basically in the greenhouse because I haven't gotten a proper shed to store everything, and I can just barely walk through my greenhouse right now. So that's one thing I won't share.
I want to see this greenhouse. I bet it's not as bad as you're saying.
Oh, trust me, it's bad. I'll send you a picture because I trust you.
I'm leaking it.
It's awful. Yeah. But yeah, what about you, Amy?
Well, there's like a few things that I just don't film. Really physical, actual gardening jobs, as some people like to say. The really sweaty, hard work, like chopping down trees, or I don't know, the really physical stuff. I don't tend to film it just because it makes it so much more effort when you have to try and film it and you're just like going back and forth. And some things you just want to get done. And gardening in the rain as well. I don't film that, even though that's kind of my favorite time to garden is when it's raining. But I don't want to break my microphone, so I just don't film it. The amount of times I've had that message pop up on my phone saying, there's water in your connector, it's insane. So I've given up with that. And then also just like the mess. There's always a really messy corner, and I just think nobody needs to see that. Do people want to see that? I mean, it is real. I think a lot of people do have messy parts of their garden, but when you're doing like Instagram content or TikTok content that's only a minute long, I feel like that's just not the most valuable thing you can be showing people. And I think that's kind of the struggle when you're making short videos, is so much gets lost and cut. So yeah, that's why I'm moving to do some more long form content alongside it as well. And also like information gets lost as well. Like you just can't give all that information in a short video. I try and add extra stuff into the caption sometimes, but people don't read it. And then yeah, it's a balance. You just can't show everything, I think.
People definitely see my messy spots on YouTube. Like I will show like a messy spot in the garden, especially during garden tours and stuff. But yeah, like you were saying with short form, it's just you only have so much time to show everything.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm a lot messier on YouTube than I am anywhere else. And I like that. But it's true. Like when you've got 30 seconds to get somebody's attention, I'm not going to show you the stinky compost.
I think that's why short form can be seen as being a little less relatable. I feel like YouTube with long form, you have as long as you want to be as real as you want to be, but it's hard to do that when you have up to a minute or
And
whatever.
I'm not trying to hide my messy corners of the garden. I'm not, well, I'm a little bit embarrassed, but I'll totally show people it. But it's just not, no one's going to learn anything from it. No one's going to gain something from that. And when you have such a short amount of time, and everyone has not much time anymore, and I don't want to waste people's time by showing them like a big pile of empty plant pots and dead seedlings.
I agree. It's difficult because I think people don't realize, as much as we're not trying to curate our feeds, we do have to be pretty ruthless editors about certain things that would make us maybe seem more relatable and real when we're talking about short form. I'm not going to show you the 1,000 bloopers of me getting bugs flying in my face and screaming when I pick up a squash and there's an insect on it.
I would watch that though.
I make the weirdest sounds when a bug flies at me, and it happens all the time. I keep getting them on my forehead and I shriek.
Please just edit all of those together.
Yeah, so this is what you don't see. Me screaming and, just pausing before I actually start talking and taking a deep breath and trying to get in my body and not in my head. And I mean, as much as I try to be real about failures too, I'm not showing those failures in the moment. Generally, I wait until I've had my temper tantrum and I've calmed down. I'm going to keep it real, but I'm also going to try to be like professional about it and brave about certain things that I normally would probably freak out about in real life.
I've gotten a little bit better at showing the failures. I used to not want to do that because like, again, you feel this pressure to be picture perfect, especially on Instagram. But when I started to share kind of failures, people were like really appreciative of that. And I was like, oh, this is a good thing. And so again, like kind of just started sharing a little more of the failures on more like YouTube. Because again, it's just where you can be the most real, I think.
Follow us on YouTube. Clearly, we're on YouTube now. Yeah, and other than that, I also don't film the front of my house, and just for because it's identifying, and I just I like my privacy. I do have some plants on my back deck that I feel like sometimes make a mini appearance in my YouTube, but I'll never show them on short form because they're just whatever, like annuals. I don't really talk about container gardens when it comes to annual flowers and stuff, but that's just something for me. And I always feel like if I harvest something out of the garden and I don't film it, I've done something wrong, but I do it all the time anyway. I'll just run out to grab something and be like, oh my God, I should film this. But I don't. I have to remember that I really don't have to film everything.
I'll tell myself the same thing. There's something that's ready to harvest and I want to eat it, but I'm like, but I need to film a harvest video and then I need to film what I'm going to make with that. And then I have to tell myself like, Meg, you don't have to film every single thing, but it's kind of like hardwired in us at this point that we
Everything's
have
content.
to, like everything is content. One of the more, I guess, like annoying things, well, it's just you got to get it in your head. Okay, you can chill a little bit. Everything doesn't have to be content.
Yeah. I do feel like I would show more recipes if I wasn't dealing with the chronic fatigue stuff too. I cannot do a full harvest video and then also do a full like cooking video. They are so much more labor intensive than people realize. They really take forever. If I barely have energy to cook dinner as it is, I'm not going to spend that time like filming it too. So people ask me for like recipe videos and I'm just not able to like do them. All right, Meg, what would you think would surprise people about your social media pages?
So I think the first kind of like misconception about my garden/page is that my garden is a lot smaller than it looks online. A lot of people think that I have a big farm or an acres of land, and I don't. My house, including my front yard and my house and my backyard, is under a quarter of an acre. I think it's like 0.23 acres. So I'm not sure exactly what square footage my backyard is, but it's pretty small. I think it just looks bigger because I've packed it so full of everything that I possibly can. Like my entire backyard is basically a garden and the chickens. But yeah, I think a lot of people think that I live on like a farm and I don't. It's a very urban backyard.
You've really maximized the space.
Oh yeah, I don't think that I could fit anything else. I am maxed out even though I want to and I may need to expand into my front yard and start putting beds in the front yard, but I don't know because the next thing that would surprise people is that I don't live in the best area of my city. So I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my neighborhood is it's not the best area. Like we definitely hear gunshots a lot. There
Oh,
Yes. I will be out in my garden and I'll just hear a gunshot. And I think it's really sad how immune I think I've become to it. Like, we do hear gunshots all the time. There's a lot of like petty theft. There's people that'll come and steal stuff off of our front porch, mainly kids that are like, we have a high school right behind us. So there's these high school kids that'll just steal stuff off of our porch thinking that it's like funny. So I do have to monitor my home and my garden pretty heavily. And I think that, yeah, I don't know if that would surprise a lot of people because it's like my backyard is just this little serene slice in this kind of sketchy neighborhood. So I think that would surprise a lot of people. And then the last thing I think that would surprise people, and I get this comment a lot, is that I'm not a trad wife. I think a lot of people think that I'm a trad
Yep,
wife.
I get that.
I've never thought you were a trad wife.
I get comments like that a lot.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not even a wife yet. I'm not married yet. I am engaged, but I am not married yet, and I don't have children. So I'm just a girl. I'm just a girl. I'm just doing
She's
things
just
that
a
I
girl,
love.
you guys.
I'm just a girl. I'm just, out here doing what I love to do. and that's gardening. Just because I'm like, cooking dinners and stuff. I think the garden to table content is what makes people think I'm a trad wife. And like, I'll get comments on, I used to make, let's see what the garden will give us for a date night. And then I would like make a dinner, and I would get comments like, you're not going out for date night. Oh, you're just, why are you cooking for your husband and stuff? If I want to, I will. There's nothing wrong with that. But also that's not what this type of content is. It's
Right.
just me making a meal for our in-home date night. And me and my fiance, I would say that we don't even really follow traditional gender roles in our relationship in the slightest. I am definitely the more messy one in the relationship. My fiance does most of the cleaning in the house. I do a lot of the cooking, but he cooks too. It's not traditional at all.
I would love to see you make a video where you're like, my husband wanted to eat this for date night, so I chaos sewed some carrots.
Like Barry Nara Smith.
Yes, yes.
I've been thinking about this.
Oh my gosh. And I should. I actually have carrots that I can harvest right now. Thank you, Amy. Keep an eye out for that video. It's
I can't wait
coming.
to see that. I have had the trad wife comment before as well. Also doomsday prepper vibes as well, and like all of that. I
Yes.
just like growing food. There's nothing more to it. I just like gardening. That's it.
I think we're just vibing. Like we're just vibing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of people ask me why I don't have children, which I think is like a pretty rude comment to get.
definitely.
Because it's like it's no one's business.
And that's a big question for our gardening account.
Yeah.
Whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it with the plants. I don't know.
I've gotten comments like, why don't you have kids? They'll help you out with all these chores. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not like what kids are for,
Right.
first of all.
No, I get comments all the time that'll be like, "Oh, whatever man has you is so lucky." And I'm like, first of all, you're assuming a lot of things about my sexuality. Second of all, I'm not really here for the benefit of another person. I have my own value as a person. It's very interesting the assumptions that people will make.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
I laugh at it. I'll screenshots to my friends, like comment of the day. And it's just become like a funny thing at this point.
You do develop a thick skin for it. It's just kind of like you have to laugh it off at a
A
certain point.
100%. You have to
Mm,
develop a thick skin because
yeah.
I could talk about the crazy comments all day long. Like we're just grazing the surface, but there's a bunch.
I also get the same comment of my garden being smaller than it looks. Like when people come to my garden who have only seen it online, they're like, oh, it's actually really small. Because the garden where I grow food is tiny, which is where I do all of my content basically. And I think it's because it's just so green around the edge of the garden and there's like a stone wall around it, but there's plants that grow up the side of the stone wall and on top of it. So you can't really see where it ends, maybe. So yeah, my garden's pretty tiny and you can't really get a sense of scale in little short videos. I think I'll do more stuff on YouTube, doing proper tours and proper looks at it so you can kind of tell a bit more maybe. But yeah, my garden's really not that big. And then people also just assume that you're always in the garden because that's all they see. And to be honest, at the moment, I am only in the garden when I'm filming it. Unfortunately, I wish I was spending a lot more time in the garden. I really don't spend that much time in the garden. Even on a good week, it's only a few hours. Occasionally, I'll get to spend like a full day, like just getting stuff done, but really, I don't get to spend that much time in the garden. So, yeah, you can't really just judge what someone's doing with their whole life from a few minute long videos, I guess.
It's too hot to be out in the garden right now, to be honest.
Mm.
It's like miserable out there. We're in the peak of the summer. Well, we're going into fall, but yeah, it's still too hot.
Yeah, what about you, Dagny? What would people be surprised about?
Yeah, I think number one is I get a lot of comments from people saying, "Oh my gosh, you must grow enough food to sustain your family." And that has never been the goal for me. I'm not trying to be self sufficient at all. I do not grow my food to sustain us. So I tend to have some extra that I'll put away like in the freezer, but I've never been really big into canning and preserving and all of that, only because it's so labor intensive and I just don't have the time or energy. So I'm really just gardening to just get outside and be in nature, not sustain us. Another thing that I think people don't realize unless you hear it in my audio, which I'm always trying to make it quieter, but I'm on a really busy road. Like our road used to be very quiet, like a country road. And now it's like during like rush hour, it's like a constant stream of traffic, and you can actually see it in the background, especially in like my greenhouse videos. You'll see it through the windows. Like the road is like right there, and it's very, very loud. And I've had to contend with that and have like audio issues with that as well. And it's also, like you guys are saying, smaller than it looks. It's still pretty big. The entire property is an acre, but because we have those 70 acres of fields behind us, it looks enormous, and it's truly not. The space that I'm gardening in, the elevated raised beds are roughly like 250 to 300 square feet worth of growing space, which is still huge, but it's not like I have like massive in-ground rows and rows of crops everywhere. Even though we do have more space in ground that I probably could be gardening in, it just isn't like necessary for me because I'm not trying to grow to sustain myself. I also don't garden all day every day. It's probably maybe 15 to 20% of what I do throughout the week is spend time in the garden. And I don't know everything about every plant or even that much in general. Like people will ask me stuff, and I am gardening on instinct a lot of the time. Like I'm kind of just figuring it out as I go, like the rest of us. So there are certain plants that I definitely know more about than others just because they're my favorites, but I'm learning more and more every year too. All right, Meg, tell us some things that we see online that maybe just aren't realistic or some common misconceptions that you see.
I think the biggest misconception that irks me the most is the whole fig wasp thing. There are people that think that if you bite into a fig, it's going to have a wasp in it. That's not true. And here's why. I'm going to go into a whole rant.
She's got the receipts.
so, so okay. In ancient times,
Here we
Whoa.
go.
We're going really far back.
in ancient times, when there was a fig tree, it needed to be pollinated by wasps. The fig has inverted flowers. So the fig that we actually eat is actually just an inverted flower. So it blooms inside. So it requires a pollinator to go in there and pollinate the flowers. But we're talking about ancient times here. In modern times, we have cultivated fig varieties that do not need pollinators. They're strong, independent figs that don't need no pollinator. They don't need a
Come
wasp.
on, girls.
Exactly. 9 times out of 10, the fig trees that you're buying in your garden center, it's a variety that does not require pollination. So that's one thing, is that most of the figs that we eat, they're self-fertile. They're not being pollinated by wasps. But even if they are, these wasps, I think when people think of the fig wasp, they think of a massive wasp, like the really aggressive ones that sting you and hunt you down. And they're not. They're like the size of an ant. They're like 2 millimeters or something in length. Like they're so, so tiny. And what happens when a wasp pollinates a fig, it's a female wasp, it crawls inside and it like lays all of its eggs and blah, blah, blah. And then it is dissolved by these enzymes, like completely dissolved in the fig before the fig is even ripe and ready to eat. That wasp is long gone and just completely dissolved.
Rest in peace.
But she sacrificed herself for her kids and to pollinate the fig. And a lot of people, when they make videos about this, it's just they don't go into the full picture and they kind of make it purposefully misconstrued. So it's just like this wow factor, and people are like, oh, I'm eating dead wasps. And I assure you, if you live in the United States, you have eaten way worse than a desecrated wasp the size of an ant in your food. So it's really not that big of a deal, even if it was pollinated by a wasp. And a lot of cultures eat bugs. You shouldn't demonize eating bugs. If you eat a wasp, like, it's fine. A lot of cultures eat ants and eat all kinds of bugs. You will survive, I promise you. So don't stop eating figs because you're scared of the fig wasp.
If it tastes good, then why not eat it?
Exactly. I know. I feel like the fig has just gotten so much flack in the last couple of years because people make these viral videos and they scare everyone into eating figs, and the poor fig is just misunderstood.
Agree. I feel like a lot of people just make stuff for the content, for the views, just for the sake of it, when it's not really giving the whole picture or even true, to be honest.
Right. They're just trying to get that shock factor out of people.
Mm.
They're trying to shock people so that they'll share it and be like, "Oh, I didn't know I was eating dead wasp." But you're really not. It's fine. You're fine.
There's quite a few things that I see online that are just setting unrealistic expectations, and I get that maybe a lot of us are guilty of it too. I try to be quite realistic, but There's a couple of things I'd like to say. So, the massive garden harvest, I love watching them. Sometimes they can make people feel guilty that they're not harvesting that much food from their garden. That's totally fine. You don't need to harvest that much food every single day. And a lot of these people aren't harvesting that much food every day. And a lot of people just harvest things for the sake of it. You're not going to eat that food today.
I'm guilty of this. I do that because a lot of my content is the garden harvest because that's what people love to see. But you're right, like I'm not eating that food that day and I save. I won't harvest for just a little bit so that I have a larger harvest. And sometimes it's a little bit on purpose, sometimes it's not on purpose. Sometimes I'll just have all of that. But yeah, that's totally a misconception too. It's you shouldn't feel bad. I think a lot of people like watching that content because it's relaxing and like you see what varieties people are growing, but it shouldn't make you feel like your garden is less than or you're not doing as well at gardening if you're not harvesting all of that at once.
Agree. I love watching it and I love the ASMR of pulling peppers. The noise is just so satisfying.
Yes.
And also just the noise of the little roll into the basket. Sounds so good. So I love watching it, but I do think a lot of people are like, oh, my garden sucks because I don't harvest like massive baskets full of stuff every
Yeah.
day. And you really don't need to. As long as you're enjoying gardening and if you want to eat some stuff from the garden and you get to, that's great. It's a win. Another thing that I think is setting unrealistic expectations is that some of the bigger gardening accounts have at least one or two gardeners that are doing their garden for them, which is why they look so perfect. And people are watching that thinking, oh, like, I'm spending all this time doing my garden, but it doesn't look anything like that. And it's because you don't have a full team of gardeners gardening for you. And a lot of people aren't that transparent about that, I think.
Exactly. Like they have help and also with editing videos too, like the larger channels. Like I've gotten comments before, I have been collaborating with Epic Gardening for a little while and I will get comments on my own YouTube channel like why do your videos suck basically like why is your editing not up to par and I'm like because I'm a one woman team over here, okay? I'm me, myself and I when you see my content, I filmed it, I edited it, I planned it, and they have a whole team. It's an amazing team. Like their editors are great, but it's a whole team effort. And a lot of the bigger gardeners have like help with the actual gardening as well.
Exactly. And like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you can afford to hire a gardener or if you want to, go for it. And I also get that, like, when you're doing content or whatever, you just run out of time and you lose all the time that you would normally spend gardening. You just can't do it as much anymore. So I get why, but I also think like a lot of people are watching that thinking, man, my garden sucks. I think like comparing your garden to other people's on social media is probably, or comparing anything to other people on social media isn't the best thing to do, but it's easily done, I think.
Definitely.
Just don't compare anything. Don't compare your garden. Don't compare your body. Don't compare your hair or whatever.
Agree.
Things are not always what they seem on social media.
For sure. You don't see what happens behind the scenes and all that jazz. So, what about you, Dagny? Do you have any things that you think are not represented so accurately on social media?
Yeah, let me get on this soapbox, please, because I have a lot to say. No, I'm going to gloss over two of them because I feel like I could literally do a whole episode about them, but I know I'm going to ruffle some feathers. Electroculture. I'm sorry. We're sticking copper in the ground now. No. I don't know if this is big copper. I don't know who started this.
Big copper.
Who started this? I really need to know because, like, it has been debunked. We have talked about this. It does not work, and I see big accounts claiming that it does work. Nothing is a substitute for just paying attention to your garden and taking those cues and rolling with them. There's just no quick fix. And I feel like electroculture is kind of marketed as this quick fix. Just stick a copper rod in the ground and everything will grow better. I just don't get it. And my next one is the damn AI gardens. What is going on? There's so much fake content. Somebody sent me a video yesterday. It had to have been fake. They were growing like rows and rows of cabbages in between bricks in the ground. It was a video and it looked hyper realistic, but there's just no way this woman had this brick garden growing out of the cracks, and these were full-size plants. There was just something off there, and we are not trained to look critically at these things, and there is just a proliferation of it happening on social media right now. But I think The most interesting thing for me is how people assume that I have the exact same climate and environmental concerns that they do. So I get a lot of angry comments of people being like, well, that plant's not a perennial in zone whatever. And I'm like, well, I'm not in that zone. You do have to, especially in gardening, look at the profile, see what zone they're in, and take that context into consideration. I've gotten comments like this on my posts about bees, where people will be like, well, what do you do about bears? I don't have bears. So it's just not something that I have to deal with at all. So I think just taking whatever you're seeing online with a grain of salt and considering the context is like super, super important with anything, but especially with social media.
I get a lot of comments about the zone thing as well. And it's just, I'm sorry, but I can't give the information for every single zone in 30 seconds. It's just not possible. So you'll have to like adapt it based on where you are, what your climate is.
Adapt it or actively seek out accounts that are in your climate. And I know there's not a lot in zone 6, so that's like an advantage that I have talking about like growing in the colder seasons too, which is good. Okay, ladies. Well, I had a really fun time digging into the nitty gritty with both of you today. I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions and comments about the behind the scenes of what we talked about. But thank you so much for listening. If you want to make sure and catch all the rest of our future episodes, make sure you are subscribed. We're all over the internet now. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Instagram, TikTok, and Apple Podcasts. So follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we will see you next time.